So in part one, I went over casting these little metal lightning bolts and sculpting this piece with the lightning bolts embedded in the piece. Now I'm going to talk about how I made this silicone mold of the piece that allows me to insert the lightning bolts into the mold, then cast resin into the silicone so that the final piece has the metal lightning bolts embedded in the resin. So the first thing I have to do is figure out how I want to design this mold, how many pieces it's going to be, how it's going to open up, where the pour spout's going to be from. There's a lot of factors to consider when making a mold. I will get into that at a later date in a different tutorial that just focuses on molds. But this mold turned out to be a little bit more ambitious than most molds because of the metal lightning bolts. It actually is a three-piece mold. I'm splitting this mold right down the middle. So what I'm doing here is using a polymer clay to lay up the bottom half of the mold. I'm smoothing it out and following a line that I've drawn around the piece. Then I'll square it up so I can build a box around it. The box is made out of foam core. I take the measurements of each side and then cut one long strip. Then on one side just cut halfway through the foam core so I could snap it apart. It forms a nice little box. I wrap the box around it and then with a glue gun run a bead of glue around it so it's secured to a board. The little indented spots in there I push in later. That's a key registration that allows the two halves of the mold to kind of lock together like a puzzle. Here I'm mixing up the silicone. It's Mold Star 15 by a company called Smooth On. It's a two-part mold, part A and part B, measured in equal volumes. Mix it up, pour it. It takes about 4 hours to fully harden. This machine here is a vacuum chamber. I vacuum the air out of the silicone. It's just a process that gives you clean castings and no air bubbles in your casting. After the silicone hardens, I pull the box off, flip it over, and then prepare the other side for the other half of the silicone. Here I'm attaching sprues or air vents. This prevents any air bubbles from getting trapped in those little spots, and it also allows for the resin to pour a little bit more smoothly. So the third piece of this mold is this little plug in the center of the lightning bolts. This is just going to make it easy for me to insert the metal lightning bolts. After all three pieces finish curing, I open it up, and this is what the three pieces look like. Here I'm dusting in a little baby powder. This acts as a mold release. It helps the resin pop out a little bit easier, and it also prolongs the life of your mold. Then I insert the lightning bolts into their little slots, close the mold up, and pour the resin. The resin I'm using is called Smooth Cast 300, also from Smooth On. It sets up in about 3 minutes, so I have to mix it up fast and get it into the mold. It's a two-part process, part A and part B, measured in equal amounts, just like the silicone. The mold's inside a pressure pot. After the mold's filled with resin, I close the pressure pot and with an air compressor inject air into the pot at about 52 psi. This also helps get rid of any air bubbles by basically imploding them because of the pressure. So it sets up in about 3 minutes. About 30 minutes later I can open the mold. So I pop the two halves open, then I pull the little third plug piece out, and there are the metal lightning bolts embedded into the cast resin. Then I'll mask off the lightning bolts with some tape and add some paint.